So I want to welcome you here on the Jenkins training. So hopefully everything will work as it should, but I see that the presentation has stopped working. So please give me a minute to sort out a technical problem with PowerPoint. Okay, I see PowerPoint just doesn't want to cooperate with me. Ono to nechce jakoby mirrorovat. Když mám zaplay mirror, tak PowerPoint prostě nechce dělat mirror. Můžete, no. Když tak si mítněte zvuk. Mě totálně vytuhnul PowerPoint. Jo. To je teda fakt super. Mně normálně zmizel kurzor na Macu a nejde vypnout prezentační režim na PowerPointu. A když teďka odhlásím Hangout, tak musím vytvořit nový live link na YouTube. Což je jako totálně v prdeli. Já zkusím oblbnout ten PowerPoint. Ne, no, je to tak skvělá věc. Tak, a teďka připojím. Tak teď, když to připojím a neschválím. No, na korektoru není vůbec nic, tak to je úplně. Jo, to je v pořádku, že to má takový delay, bohužel. Má to nějakých, já nevím, 10 vteřin. Proč do prdele nejde? Jo. Protože jsem neviděl kurzor, že jo, tak prdele to nechci. Skvělý. Už to funguje. O, tak. Ale už začínáme, jo? Okay, sorry for the delay. I'll let everyone on Slack know that we can start finally. So finally PowerPoint is cooperating. So hello, I want to welcome you on Jenkins training presentation. Please let me know how the sound is in the live stream. I think it should be fine, but let me know if you are hearing any issues. But in the meantime, we will start. So first, something quickly about me. My name is Jakub Novák. I've been developer for over 7 years, and mostly I've done mix of PHP and JavaScript. Now I'm fully JavaScript, and I've been with CN for 2 years. And let's take a look at what we will be taking a look at today. So we will first take a look at what it is like to install Jenkins. We will take a look at a sample project that we will use for all the Jenkins setup. We will create our first build in Jenkins. I will give you some introduction to Groovy, which is a programming language that is used by Jenkins Pipeline, which is the next point. Jenkins Pipeline is a new way to configure builds in Jenkins, so I will give you introduction to that. Then I will show you how to publish artifacts from your builds. I will show you how to do unit testing, test coverage, and code standard checks in Jenkins in the sample project. And then I will mention some further steps that you can take, but I will only mention them because we will definitely not have enough time for those. And then there will be a room for questions, and I will also pause for questions in various sections if you have any. So that's what we will do today. So let's start with installing Jenkins. So it's really simple. If I go to jenkins.io, which is the website for Jenkins, there is a download link. I don't know how well you can see it. Hopefully it should be well visible. And when you click download, basically you have many options here. You have various Linux distributions. You have Windows. You have a war package. If you're familiar with Java applications, you know what it is. But I think this method is not recommended, but it is still there. But for example, Windows, I will not mention Windows too much. But don't worry, it is a fully supported platform. And in fact, many people use Jenkins on Windows to build, for example, desktop applications. And there are even plugins for like Unreal Engine and other things like that. So people are definitely using it a lot. So don't worry. And for example, I had CentOS. I have a CentOS virtual host on my Mac. So if I click the CentOS link here, I will get some instructions on how to install Jenkins there. And as you can see, it is really common stuff that you find with basically any Linux program. You just add some repository and you install Jenkins. And because we don't want to wait for that, I have pre-installed Jenkins on my virtual machine. I have followed these steps. So I will now show you what a first run of Jenkins looks like, hopefully. Yes, it's working, thank God. So when you first start Jenkins, it will ask you for a password that it has generated in a file on the server. So I will now have to log on to the server and retrieve this initial password. So I'll just copy this path here. and I'll go to the terminal. And I will get the contents of this file. You can see it's some generated hash, basically. So you take that and you put it into that input box here. Then you click continue. And now it will ask you what plugins you want to install. If you're experienced, you can select plugins yourself, but I would recommend definitely clicking install suggested plugins because they are very basic. And if we look at them really quickly, there's Ant, there's Gradle for your Java projects. You are definitely familiar with that if you're using Java. There's Git, there's Subversion still. You probably don't need it. And there's GitHub stuff as well. If you don't use GitHub, you might not need that. But yeah, so those are the base plugins. And this step, installing plugins, takes something about 10 minutes. And it's even longer when I'm live streaming. So we will not wait for this. So I will fast forward my virtual machine to a state when this is finished. So if you bear with me for a second. So now my virtual machine is starting, and we will have to wait about a minute before Jenkins boots up and starts. So I have to close this. So yeah, so the live streaming is definitely taking a toll on my Mac. It is taking a while to boot up. So the machine is booted up, and let's see what Jenkins is doing. Yes. By the way, this is a screen that you might see sometimes. This is normal. This is what it looks like when you reboot the Jenkins server, for example, or if you restart Jenkins, you get this screen, and that's normal. And in the meantime, before it boots up, what else you would see in that startup wizard that we have seen? It would ask you to create your first user. I would definitely recommend that you create users for the various people in your project, because then you don't have to worry when something wrong happens in a build. You will know who did it, who ran a build, for example. So I would definitely recommend setting up users, but I just have the admin user, and there is nothing else in the wizard, so we didn't miss anything important. So now we will first sign into our freshly installed Jenkins without any jobs or anything, and you should see a fresh Jenkins installation. Yes, so this is what it looks like. And you can tell that you have admin rights because you see this manage Jenkins here. If you don't see it, you don't have admin rights, and you have to go to your ops people and convince them to get you admin rights. So yes, so this is what installing Jenkins is like. Hopefully this is enough. We don't have time for much more. So what we have seen is going to the official site, clicking download, following the steps, and I think that yeah, that's it pretty much. And we've seen also the startup page of first installation of Jenkins. So are there any questions for this? No questions here. I'll pause for the for Slack. I don't see any questions on Slack. Okay, so we can continue. So now I will show you a sample project that I've prepared to test out all the various Jenkins stuff. So It is a pretty basic JavaScript project, and it just shows hello from Jenkins sample. If I run it, I have it running. I think if I start it again, it's using Yarn. Yarn is a package manager in JavaScript. If you're using PHP, you will be familiar with Composer, for example. It's something like that. And when I run it, and it just shows hello from Jenkins sample, nothing really fancy. There is one lint error there, which we will definitely notice later. And if we look at the source code, there is one test, which is called it renders without crashing. This is what you get by default with Create React App. This application was created using Create React App, and only slight modifications were made. I will show those later. But other than that, it is the default Create React App that you get when you use the tool. So that's it. Yeah, and here in the source code, if we take a look, the lint error that we have seen is here. It's in my application file. I have an import that is not being used. So that is my lint error that we will see later. So yes, hopefully this should be all clear. So it is a JavaScript project created using Create React App, and the test framework that's there is called Jest. It also publishes coverage information. I will show you how later. And the code quality check tool is called ESLint. If you have PHP or Java projects, you will have different tools, but they will have the same output. I will tell you soon what the output needs to be for it to work with Jenkins. So this is the sample project. I think, does anyone have any questions about this? I don't think so. I'll give it a second also for Slack. It's also good to have a pause in between all the technical stuff. Okay, so we can continue. Now we will finally create our first build with Jenkins. So don't be afraid of this interface. It is really simple. You have create jobs here, and you also have a new item here on the left. That's probably what you will be using the most, because this will disappear as soon as you create at least one job. So let's click new item, and you have various types of jobs. This freestyle is the old type of Jenkins jobs where you can click everything, but we will be using pipeline, which allows you to define the build using code. But don't worry, it is not very complicated. I will show you. Let's call it sample, for example, and I'll click OK. So that will create the build. And as I've said, it is described using code. You have two options. Either you can paste the code directly here into the build, or you can have Jenkins fetch it from a source code repository. So you can, for example, here select Git, and you would typically have this inside your project source code. You would have a file called Jenkins file. That's what it looks for, and the code would be there. But instead, because we want to experiment really quickly, we will actually input it directly here into the build. But you can use this for experimenting, but as soon as you're done, I would definitely recommend in your project to switch to source control and commit your Jenkins file. So let's see what like a really simple build looks like nowadays. This has changed twice over the last 2 years, but I think it is stable now. So hopefully I will not get this wrong. So we are defining stages. And we will just clone our source code. And here I will be cheating a little bit because my source code lives on the same server as Jenkins, so I can just input a path there. So normally, if you have here, you would have a URL. It's the same URL you use to clone a Git project. And normally, you also need to have some sort of authentication for your Git repositories. So the way you would do this is if you go into Jenkins settings, here you have credentials on the left. And if you click Jenkins here and global credentials, you can have add credentials. And you have either an SSH certificate, a private key, basically. This is probably what you would use most of the time. And you would have some user, for example, Jenkins, and you would paste your private key here. You would give your credential some ID, my credential, for example. And this is what you would do typically. Alternatively, you can also use username with password and not private key. That would work over HTTPS, for example. So now that it's created, if I go here and click update again, I will see this ID here if I need to in the future. And also the private key can be stored on the server. That's a more advanced thing. I will not bother you with that. But the important thing here is this ID. So here, when we are cloning from Git, you can put credentials ID and this ID that you have created. And that would then use the credentials. We will not use any credentials. So I will remove this because we are just cloning from a directory that's accessible, so we don't need it. And then another stage, which we'll call build. That will run yarn. That's the package manager. It installs packages. And we will call yarn build. This sh step, it runs console commands, basically. Command line commands. Also works on Windows. It's called the same. So now I need to push my source code actually into that Jenkins server. It's not pushed there yet. So let's give it a second. It will ask me for the password. Yes, and it's pushed. So now we can save the build. And hopefully it should work. We are now in the build. If we go to the root directory, you can see there's a list of builds here. You can also run the build through this. So now the build is running. And while the build is running, you can look at console output here. And if you know anything about JavaScript projects, all those node packages take a while to install. So now we will wait for about, I think, like 20 seconds or a minute or something like that, and it should install. So maybe in the meantime, I will ask you if you have any questions for what we've seen so far. Nobody here has any questions. I don't see anyone on Slack having questions. So let's wait.
Maybe one question. You
Počkej chvilku.
Okay, one question.
Okay, you can ask now. And please,
you have created pipeline job, right?
Yes.
So this script about cloning and stages, this will fire every time you push to the Git, or when it will start?
So currently it will start. Currently it will start only when I click build. But if you actually select a Jenkins file in a Git repository, you can configure how often it checks the Git repository. So you can have it check like once every minute or something for new commits, and it will fire on new commits then. And also there's possibility to install plugins for triggers, for example, from Bitbucket and other systems. And then it can get triggered as soon as you push immediately. So there are various ways. But for simplicity, I'm just showing running manually currently.
Okay.
But maybe if I really quickly, okay, the build has finished, but I will really quickly show you if I create another item. I'll call it test. If I select pipeline from SCM, then here I would configure a Git repository here, and here on build triggers, you can actually configure when the build will happen. So you would select poll SCM, and here you have a schedule, and you click the question mark here to actually see what this schedule means. And you get this really, really long description. So here is one example every 15 minutes. So you would probably just copy this and give it like every 5 minutes or something like that. And that's how you make it build on new commits.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. Okay, so if there are no other questions, I'll maybe delete this other build. So now our first build has finished. You can see the two stages that we've defined, the clone and build, and it was successful. It's not really good for us currently because it didn't publish anything, it didn't test anything. It just really ran a build. And if the build failed, you would see a red ball here, or I don't know what to call it, red circle. Yeah, but it succeeded, so it's blue. I don't know why it's not green, but it's blue always. So that's this is what a successful build looks like. And if you click on console output, you can see all the various output from the build. You can see that React has complained about a code style thing, but it did not actually fail the build. It actually succeeded. So the result of the build is a success. Okay, so let's get back to PowerPoint if it cooperates again. So we have seen our first build. We have seen how to create a task in Jenkins. I've mentioned how to manage Git credentials when you need to log in into your Git repository. I've shown you how to clone from Git inside pipeline code. And we have seen how to run a build basically in a simple way. Yeah, and thanks to Martin's question also, we have seen how to trigger periodic builds on source control updates, which is good. So I've already paused for questions, so I don't think I need to pause again. So maybe let's do a really quick introduction to Groovy. And so Groovy is a simple language built on top of Java. And let's actually see what we can do with it. I'll just mention it really quickly. So here, anywhere pretty much, you can define variables with the def keyword. So this would define a string, or you can define a number, things like that. If you need to concatenate string, which is something you would do probably sometimes when you calculate some branch name or something, you can do it using the plus. You can also concatenate arrays this way. Arrays are written like this. And you can concatenate them again with the plus sign. So as I've mentioned, it is built on top of Java, so any valid Java is also valid Groovy. And the def keyword here, if you don't specify it, it still works, but the variable is created on the global scope, which is not a good thing. So definitely put it there. And this, if I put some string here, is the same as doing string variable. Or if I have interpolated string, then it's gstring. But in this case, I have a simple string, so it is a string. So if you use def instead, which is simpler, it automatically infers the type from what you've initialized here. Or if you don't specify any type, I think the type will be object. But I'm not really sure, so maybe some experienced Groovy person would correct me. And some interesting thing, what are these things that we see here? So in Groovy, if the last parameter to a function is a closure, you can actually pass it like this. You do opening brace and a closing brace. So this is the same as if I did this. So this way you avoid the parentheses hell that you have, for example, in JavaScript. I'm not sure what it's called, but it has a name. I'm sure someone knows it. And here, these are basically function calls. So pipeline is a function call. Agent is a function call. Any is probably some sort of a global constant. Stages is again a function call. It has one argument, which is a closure. This is interesting. This is new. So stage is also a function call, but this time it has two arguments. First argument is a string, and the second argument is a closure. As I've said, if you're passing closure as a last argument of a function, you do it at the end, and it is separate from the argument list. But you could also do this if you really wanted to. It's possible. So this is so that you know a bit about Groovy, which is a good thing. So I think we have everything. Yeah, and here we have named arguments. What this really is, it gets converted into a map into a Java map, and that gets passed in as a first argument if you have named arguments. So are there any questions about Groovy? No questions here. I don't see any questions on Slack. So as we've seen, it's a simple language built on top of Java. I have said that any Java code is also valid Groovy code. You can create closures really easily and pass them. And you can create variables also easily, more easily than in Java probably. And that's all. So no questions. So we can go on. We will see. Let's look really briefly at what Jenkins Pipeline is. So to answer this question, let's Google Jenkins Pipeline. You get this page, Pipeline Jenkins, and this gives you a really good explanation if you want a long explanation. I'll give you just a short explanation. It's approximately a 2-year-old addition to Jenkins, and it's the new way to build things in Jenkins. in Jenkins. So you describe your build using code, which is a pretty simple code actually. And pipeline actually has two syntaxes today. What we have seen is what's called a declarative pipeline syntax, where you wrap everything a lot and it gets built, and you can just you can specify where it builds at the top here. Or you can have scripted pipeline, it's called. That's the original way how to do this, which was released 2 years ago. And you can have various node calls here, and it can build in parallel on multiple nodes and things like that. So if you want more control over your builds, you can definitely check out the scripted version of the Jenkins pipeline. So yes, so that's that. And some advantages of pipeline. Yeah, so you define your build using code. You can actually pause and resume the builds, and you can use libraries inside your pipeline code, and you can even define your own libraries. So you can support some really complex build codes if you need to. Okay. So I think that is a good introduction. So again, we've seen that build scripts based on Groovy code. It can run on multiple nodes, including in parallel. Most of Jenkins, yeah, this is a good thing to mention. Many plugins of Jenkins have already been migrated to support pipeline, so you should not see any problems. And I've mentioned the declarative versus scripted syntax. So are there any questions for Jenkins pipeline? No questions here. I don't see any questions on Slack. Okay, so we can continue. So now let's see how to make our build a little bit more useful using build artifacts. We need to be able to download whatever Jenkins has built for us at least. So let's get into our Jenkins configuration for our job configuration, and let's add a new stage. So we know that we want to archive our source code so that we can use it. We are not sure exactly how to do this. So there are two great references when you're writing pipeline Groovy code. One is Jenkins Pipeline reference, pipeline steps reference, sorry. I think that should get you to that page. Here it is, pipeline steps reference. And this is a really great documentation, and you can just search for this. Every plugin that is actually published in Jenkins has, and that has any pipeline integration will be mentioned here. They have a standard for documenting everything, and it is actually mandatory. So you will see your pipeline code here if it has pipeline code. So don't worry. So if you want to just search for something, for example, here we would look for archiving. So here we can definitely immediately see core archive artifacts. So that's easy. So yeah, and if we click this, it shows us all the parameters for the archive artifacts function, which is great. This is great. It's definitely very useful when you're searching for stuff. Then there is also a second way. If you know what you're looking for, there is this pipeline syntax link down here. And when you click this, we get to a great page where we have a list of all the installed steps inside our Jenkins. So we will select archive artifacts, and it has one argument. And then when you click advanced, there are also other optional arguments. You can fill them out here actually. our stuff is inside the build directory. So I'll just put build here. You click generate pipeline script, and that's it. It generates the code for you. And you can just copy and paste this and use it. So this is a really great thing. And if, for example, if we look at the Git step, I have to admit I have cheated. Last time I was typing that command, I would definitely not remember everything that I've written down. But if I fill out everything here that I need, branch master, it actually checks if you have a connection to the repository as well, but we don't care about that. You can select the credentials here. It would fill out the ID for you. So generate pipeline script, yeah, and because master is default, if I did, for example, develop, it would put the branch there as well. So this is pretty much what we had when we've done it manually. So this is a great way to generate your pipeline code. We will definitely be using this in every step. So, but now back to our artifacts. Let's see what artifacts look like. So we will save this. We will run the build. Hopefully the build should take, I think, about 30 seconds now that the packages are installed. So let's wait, and we will also have a pause. And it has failed. Why? Let's see. At least you will see what a failed build looks like. No artifacts found that match the file pattern build. Yes. Okay, so it expects a file pattern. It was probably written down there, but I was too stupid to read it. So you will be doing this kind of experimenting a lot when you work with Jenkins. So I need to do a slash and an asterisk. I think that should be it. So let's wait again. It's a good thing to know that our build takes 16 seconds. I know other builds that take 2 hours, so we are still in good standing. But don't worry, this time will go up as we add more features to this. Yes, the build has finished. And by the way, you see this download icon here. You can see it has produced artifacts, this build. When I click the build, we have build artifacts here. We have all the build files, so index and the JavaScript file and things like that. If I click the build artifacts here, I can click all files in zip, or I can actually browse the file structure that was published. And also, when we go to the main page of the build, we have last successful artifacts. When you click here, you again can download everything as zip if you want to. So this is how you do artifacts in Jenkins. So let's recap what we have seen. Artifacts can be captured. Yeah, and what I didn't mention is when you have a build in Jenkins, it actually keeps a directory with the code cloned. And it doesn't clone it again every time you build. It clones it just the first time, and it updates the code as you do further builds. That's why it takes 18 seconds from the second build on, because it doesn't need to reinstall the packages. And this is all stored inside var Jenkins home on Linux, and that's also what you would need to back up if you are backing up Jenkins configuration. This Jenkins home directory contains all Jenkins configuration, and there's also a workspace underneath it. Let's maybe look really quickly at it. So yeah, I think it is somewhere else here. It depends on the Linux distribution. But never mind. It is there somewhere. You would have to find it for your Linux distribution. And underneath it is a workspace directory, and that contains all your checked out branches of builds. So artifacts are captured from that workspace that we've talked about and saved. They can be later downloaded, and you can deploy them manually if you want to. You can also, of course, do automated deployments with Jenkins, but we will not really go into that because it is a bit complicated topic. So that's what we have seen with artifacts. So are there any questions for artifacts? Okay, no questions here. I don't see anything on Slack. Okay, so we can continue. Let's see if we can actually, because we don't have much time left. So let's look at unit testing. In our project, we have one test, and I have set up CI-test task, which runs the test framework and adds a jest JUnit reporter. So Jenkins accepts a JUnit test format, and that's what you need to configure your project to produce. So when we actually run this CI-test, it would create a JUnit.xml file in the root of the project. So let's configure the build to capture this and publish it. So now we will add a new stage. Let's actually do it before archive. Stage test. And again, we will use this handy generator here. We have JUnit. I know that it's called JUnit. And I think it was called JUnit.xml, yes. And you can configure a threshold here. You can configure, for example, that having 50% of tests fail is fine. If that's your thing, that's definitely not my thing, so I will not do that. I want all tests to pass. So I can copy the JUnit line that is generated for me. I will save this. I will run the build. And hopefully we should see a build with unit tests. No, why not? No test reports file. Yes, I'm stupid. I actually didn't run the task that produces that file, so I also have to do sh yarn ci-test, run that task. Build again. No, why is it's not liking?
You put the command into wrong stage, I think.
No test reports files were found. Let's see. Yes, you're. Yes, Michael is right. You could not hear him on the stream, but he told me, he screamed at me that I have put it in the wrong place. I think more people might have seen this. Sorry. So build again. And this is what you will be doing a lot with Jenkins if you're tweaking builds. Yes, it has finished. And now if we look inside the build, we have test result here, no failures. If we click into this, we see actually a list of tests, and we see it renders without crashing, has passed. And here we have 0 failures and 1 out of 1 test. So yeah, so this is what unit tests look like in Jenkins. So any questions for unit testing? No questions here. I don't see any questions on Slack for now. So we have seen that Jenkins accepts a JUnit test format, which your project needs to produce. And test results are visible in the build which we have seen. And you can configure the threshold for failures. I would definitely recommend that 100% builds need to pass, but it's up to you. So now let's get into coverage reporting, which will be pretty simple, but we need to install a plugin for this. So let's look at what installing plugins looks like in Jenkins. So let's go to Manage Jenkins and Manage Plugins here. So here, if you go into the available page, it will take a while to load because there are many available plugins. So I cannot type right away, it is stuck. I get the beach ball of hell on my Mac. So let's wait for a few seconds. It's normal. And now we can type. So for our coverage, no, still cannot type. Okay. So for coverage, we need to Cobertura plugin. And while we are installing plugins, let's also install another plugin which we will need later, which is called check style. Still waiting, it takes a while. So and now we do download now and install after restart. So it is installing our Cobertura and check style and all the dependent plugins. And I will check restart Jenkins when installation is complete. And Jenkins will automatically restart with the new plugins. So now you can at least see how plugins are installed in Jenkins, which is good. And I can see on Slack that Martin has some problem. Are you actually installing Jenkins on your machine? Just a second. Oh, unmute the mic. Yes, you can talk now.
Yes, and I'm getting failures every time, so not sure what's going on. You can check it on Slack, but probably there is no time to to fix this now.
Yeah, sorry, I will get back to it after the stream, but I don't know if you install it in Docker or...
Yes, Docker.
Yes, Docker. Okay, so that's strange. It could be internet connection or something like that, but definitely we would need to see the console output. But we can take a look later. So I think Jenkins doesn't show it. It takes forever to update, but I think it is already restarting, or it has maybe even already restarted. Let's refresh and see what happens. Yeah, it's definitely, it has already finished restarting, as we can see, I think. And the way we can tell is if we go back to our build settings. And because we don't have much time left, I will actually add code quality checks in the same step now as well, so that we can finish on time. I don't see why we don't see this job configuration. There's some problem, so I'll stop and restart Jenkins. I think it hasn't restarted after installing the plugins for some reason. So let's wait for it to start. Still loading. Okay, I think it has loaded now. It's loading the page now, so it must have loaded. Yeah, it is really slow while streaming, sorry. So, which brings me to another point. You definitely need a powerful machine for Jenkins. Be prepared for that. Don't have some small virtual machine and be wondering why Jenkins is slow. It definitely needs some power. So now let's add the coverage and the code style checks. So the coverage step is called cobertura. That is the name of the format that Jenkins accepts. And we have coverage / I don't remember what it's called. I'll just run it real quick. Yarn CI test, so that it generates the files for me. And it's inside coverage, cobertura-coverage.xml. And you can configure various thresholds in here when you want to pass your builds based on coverage results, but let's not get into it. Yeah, and this generates quite a big command. You can reconfigure it here always. So this is for coverage. And let's also add code style checks. And code style checks can be built, can be done before the build. So let's actually do it before the build. And let's separate the installing packages into a separate step as well. So installing packages will be at the top. Here's our build. And here will be our code style checks. I think it's called ci-tslint. Let's double check. ESLint. Sorry, I'm used to tslint because we use TypeScript all the time. So ESLint, and here what we are looking for code style checks is check style, which is again name of the format. And again, if you click advanced, you see all the various thresholds that you can configure. Definitely would recommend to fail builds based on wrong code style check results. And I think the file that it outputs to is checkstyle.xml. So it should be like this. And we can paste this here. So saving. And let's hope this works. And that will be the last build we run if this works. And because the steps have changed, it will re-render them here. That's what always happens. Okay, and if we go into the build, we will see two new things. We have Cobertura coverage report. If we click that, we have all the various files and coverage information inside them. Of course, we have the app covered because it tries to render it. And here we have just one statement. It is multiple line, but it is only one statement. And you can see that it has gone into it only once during the execution of the tests, which is what we expect. So that's the coverage. And check style, we have a warning, as we can see here. As I've told you, there's unused import. And we can see the warning is in app on second line. If we click details, on second line of app.js, logo is defined but never used. I would definitely recommend that you configure it that it fails the build if or marks the build as unstable if you have check style or unit test or anything wrong. Yeah, so I think we have seen everything. So quick recap. And then I will ask for questions. So code coverage accepts the Cobertura format, can be viewed in Jenkins, ability to configure thresholds, and code standard checks use the check style format. You can see them in the build output again, and you can fail builds based or mark builds as unstable based on code standards results. So maybe I'll quickly mention what else you can do. We have seen plugin management. You can move your code into a shared Groovy library, which is something I would recommend. You can configure libraries in settings in Jenkins. You can have parameterized builds, which means that before you run a build, it needs a parameter. You can also have Jenkins pause and wait for a parameter to be filled out in the middle of a build if you want to. Then you can have Slack integration, which is a great thing. You can see your failed and passed builds in Slack. You can integrate Jenkins into your pull requests so that, for example, your pull request can only be merged if the build passes, and you can have your Bitbucket or GitHub or whatever trigger Jenkins build on every created pull request if you want to. Then there's the multi-branch plugin in Jenkins, which actually creates a new build for each branch in your Git repository. This is great if you have automated deployments to dev environments, for example. This plugin is really great. It saves you a lot of work. Then you can run builds inside Docker containers. There's a Docker plugin in Jenkins. It's really great. Then legacy mode builds definitely are good to mention. That was the freestyle type of build that we have seen, and you can click everything. It's not as flexible as Pipeline, but if you prefer clicking, definitely check this out. And you can run on multiple nodes, and that would be using the scripted pipelines, or using legacy mode as well. You can run in parallel, I think. So any questions for everything that we have seen? Okay, I don't get any questions here. And I don't see any questions on Slack. So thank you everyone for attending physically or on Slack, and definitely thanks for stopping by, and hope to see you some other time as well. So goodbye.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.